Hello guys and gals, me Mudahar, and 3 months ago I made a video regarding Jeff the Killer, an infamous creepypasta, but more importantly an infamous image on the internet that has been considered lost media for quite some time now. Now, 3 months ago when I covered this, I basically talked about a disturbing update that I kind of read about, a theory that unfortunately the image could possibly be illegal. Well, actually, since then I've talked to the actual researchers, and now it seems this disturbing theory probably is not on the real side, at least from what I understand according to the researchers. One of the biggest developments have actually happened in the last 5 days regarding Jeff the Killer. So for instance, according to one of the chief researchers, one of the chief explorers in this, Juventhal has actually showcased all of this massive scraping. After months of work, 2.3 terabytes of raw text formatted into SQLite have actually been preserved in this situation. And this represents, according to these guys, a 5 to 6 times increase in known instances and significantly expands all of the context available for tracing image circulation paths. So basically in, nerd speak, translated to regular speak, what you got over here is a possibility that we might actually get to the origin points of this image. But let's start off with the very beginning, because there's a lot of information that we have to cover from the start that we probably haven't really discussed at all in this entire search. So according to the fellows over at the Jeff the Killer search community, they have absolutely put together an amazing document brought by Nashkovic and Detective Ra in this case, where again they highlight that this is basically the entire story, basically from the beginning up until the present day. Now, for anybody that doesn't know, there is a standing bounty of $15,000 from yours truly, $1,000 from Scare Theater, and $416 from a crowdfunded bounty as well. Now, of course, according to me, they have actually said that the bounty will only be rewarded from me if it does not contain any illegal material. If, however, it does, I'll still give the money, probably just to a charity, obviously, in that case. Now, before we begin in the story, there's two versions of Jeff the Killer we have to know. There's JTK1 and there's JTK2. These are images that will be referenced, of course, throughout this video that talk about the various instances, the two versions that we know exists. One of them is the more popular creepypasta version, and the other one is the more Mr. Potato / cute version that you probably found floating around. Now, where this all begins is with an individual known Killer Jeff, also known as Cesure or Jeffrey Case. Now, this is an individual that created the first Western-based story regarding the image JTK. Now, in August 2008, one of the first posts came out in 2008, August 10th, on Newgrounds by a user account known as Killer Jeff. I am such a cam whore. After finding any picture on ED, which is Encyclopedia Dramatica, older website, I think it still exists today, but it's kind of one of the old satirical websites of the past. ED begged me not to take them off and decided not to, because I would seem like a dick towards them and they got good dirt on my little secrets, involving peanut butter, so it's all good. The story of old Jeffy. He enjoys horror such as ghost stories or slasher films. Have you ever met him in person? This man is what other people call bizarre. He's like a Bloody Mary game, except you must perform it in the closet, turn off the lights, and sit down cross-legged. Repeat this saying 3 times while turning your head back and forth. He's in here with me, after the saying. Close your eyes and call out the name Jeff. He'll appear by putting his face right up to you, and proceed to yell and try to chant harm at you. To make him stop is to stand there and compliment him. Not doing so will result in a nightmarish field trip. You do the rest from their worms. Now, Cesure also uploaded a video on YouTube back on October 3rd, 2008, a video that is sadly not archived or available. Actually, it is archived, and thanks to the researchers here and, of course, to the good old-fashioned Lost Media Wiki, people weren't able to dig up the actual, video for this, which was thankfully made on Windows Movie Maker, as you can imagine, with the blue background and text, the image right over here, and, of course, the story provided to us. Almost just takes you back so far to the past, man. I mean, this is such an old world of the internet. It's crazy. This is when I was basically a toddler, to be honest with you. Now, according to the researchers over here, the event would change Jeff, turning him into a cold-blooded killer, right? The video garnered 750,000 views over a span of 8 years, and it was removed following the termination of this YouTube channel in late 2016. So that explains why the video was effectively gone. Now, the actual story that me and you most likely know is a story from an individual known as Game Fuel TV. Now, this is the Jeff the Killer creepypasta story, and it's actually up here on the Creepypasta Classics wiki. Now, if you ever read this story, and I know that I have, I even read it, made a video on it, showed it on my channel as part of a creepypasta video. And of course, it's just your standard Joker-esque style story. It's pretty goddamn cringe, but again, the most important part of the story is obviously that image. The image we're trying to hunt for is the original version of that. Where did it come from? Because clearly this is a photoshopped image. Who made it? Who is it? Who could this possibly be? That is the burning question that people have had for basically years now. Now, later on, Scare Theater would actually interview Cesure as well, too, and talk about this situation. And of course, inside over here, one of the questions that they would be asking is, where did they obtain the image from? So of course, Cesure would claim he created it using a white latex mask. So the picture was made using a white latex mask and some big plastic eyes with red rubber substance that simulated blinking. There was also a black ring around the eyes that were on covering the exposed red eyelid. After it made 2 or 3 pictures were taken and posted, the rest is history. And you would kind of think, okay, maybe that would be the end of the fucking story, right? Maybe there would just be no reality to it. Well, of course, down the road on DeviantArt, Cesar would be like, look, I may not have made the image, but I did make Jeff the Killer. I ain't bullshitting about any of that. You're lying about your brother doing anything but complaining in my comments. You didn't embarrass anyone or win anything, just cried. Second, you lied and said I send kids after you. So, argument over here. First, I was just posting with what my brother told me when it came to sending some kids to mess with him and him humiliating you or whatever. Secondly, I'm standing ground that I was the first person to associate that image to Jeff the Killer as early as mid-2008. You can try to go all the way back as far as you can to see who's the first person to associate that image with, and I can bet my life on it being me. I named the goddamn character after me. I got contracts as proof. And they made sure to do their research to even find me. So it's just interesting when, we're just talking about an internet goofy story, man. Jesus Christ. Now, according to the Jeff the Killer researchers, this is something that I didn't actually even know at the time because this is not something that came up to me, was now we're entering a scenario where there are, mentions of grooming, drugs, and domestic violence as well, too. So if you are somebody that is a little bit, sensitive to those topics, you might want to just forward the video ahead a little bit. But recently, the actions of Cesure and his brother Brandon Case have come to light. Brandon had reportedly groomed an underage fan of JTK after she was befriended by Cesure and introduced to him. Cesure is aware of his brother's actions, however, he chooses to stand by him, defend his actions, and even attack the victim by threatening legal action against her, doxing her, and threatening to SA her. Brandon has a history of domestic violence, with him perpetrating this act against a cousin. Again, Cesure is aware of this, but chooses to defend his brother instead. Brandon is considered a threat to anyone he comes across, as can be evidenced by his obsession with mass shootings and the multiple firearms he owns, of which he threatened to murder a woman with. So, yeah, if this guy's not on an FBI list, we would be surprised. Not really, because the FBI just always lets crazy shit go on. But again, this is a whole separate side investigation focusing on Cesure. So again, if you thought this guy was necessarily a great person, I would reserve that, obviously. Yeah, and they just basically got this entire guy captured in 20K, basically captured every single Reddit post this guy was on. I mean, you could probably make a separate side video on this entire thing. But this is not discussing of Cesure's activities. We're just talking about Jeff the Killer. So let's whittle on back. Now, of course, Chapter 2 takes us to 4chan searching. Now, to give you an idea, Jeff the Killer was posted on places like 4chan, according to these guys, as far back as 2008. But of course, until like 2013, there was nobody really trying to find JTK0, right? The original sort of image. So at this moment in time, there was one thread that started existing where in 2017, one user comes in on 4chan and says they came upon a video from an online platform known as Nico Nico. Now, Nico Nico, for anybody that doesn't know, is a Japanese video sharing platform, and of course is nothing special, just a regular mad that made me chuckle a bit. I was curious to see what the name of the puzzle website the jump scare was, and saw a comment that listed the name of all the sources. So of course it would lead you to this YouTube video right over here. And of course this would be one of the original pieces. So 18 years ago, oh God, I feel old. You can actually watch this video for yourself right now, this NNN broadcast, if you will. I don't know if it's like No Nut November. We'll have to ask the Japanese for this. And there it is. That's the old screamer. That's how it used to work back in the day, man. So forward for several months to January 2018, another individual on 4chan comes across an earlier source of Jeff the Killer. So this is the image they provide, which looks like it was probably generated with some modern artificial intelligence. Really, it's just Gaussian blur to all hell. I may have found the earliest source of Jeff the Killer here. Now what I need is a third one with Jeff by the bathtub. So of course they provide a link to pia.cc. So if we just kind of open that up, you'll see a congratulations 404 not found. But thankfully putting that same URL into the Wayback Machine, which is where a lot of this research is going to go to, we can actually pull up from March 13, 2021. This was the actual posting. Obviously that wasn't the day it was posted, but this is from 2005. You can see Jeff the Killer provided right here. You know, at some point I should just actually make a donation to the Wayback Machine, because if we ever lose this, I mean, it literally will be one of the most devastating blows to internet archiving. And of course, obviously this research, let's be completely real here. Now, of course, in 2021 started what we know as the modern Jeff the Killer research. So again, in 2021, well, actually 2020, this actual Reddit board was made. November 26, 2020. Can't believe it's actually been half a decade since these guys have been around, but this is one of the biggest search groups in regarding the actual Jeff the Killer image. No, this has nothing to do with that cringy ass creepypasta. No love for that, man. No love for internet spooky campfire stories. We're all just trying to find a piece of lost media. And of course, that is as true as you can find it. Now, of course, according to the actual researchers over here, this is mostly from their angle. March 10, 2022, former investigator Brickster actually discovers an archive on a website known as fileman.n1e.jp. And you have to kind of understand from here on in, we're not going to be necessarily jumping to 4chan. We're going to be jumping to a lot of Japanese chans and a lot of Japanese websites, many of which came at the earlier stages of the internet, and many of which just are not archived as effectively as many modern day websites. I mean, heck, even looking at sites like 4chan, the best way to archive places like 4chan is to usually use other third-party archival services. I mean, some of the threads we were reading were never even viewed on 4chan. They were viewed on places like Archive4Plebs to begin with. So understanding, right, one of the first things they showcased was this thumbnail on this actual website. Now, a thumbnail in this case is generally the compressed image that would be used to show, before you click on something like a thread. So even if the thread, so to speak, is gone, having the thumbnail necessarily just means that you can at least know that the thread was relevant to Jeff the Killer as opposed to something random. And to show you an example of how bad it can be when trying to archive, even when you think you have something, unfortunately, because of how these sites operate, and sometimes you can only store up to like 50 comments, for instance, right? Like you may have the image over here, but unfortunately, you won't be able to dig everything out of all these archives, because sometimes only a portion of it gets archived, a portion of it can be saved, and sometimes you just lose any leads from there, which is the unfortunate reality. So the researcher Juventhal links to kako5ch.net, where again, in this sea of constant, a conversation, you can find that some users even link to certain URLs. This URL, for instance, allowed it to link to Jeff the Killer, one of the scarier images in this case, right? And of course, there was actual comments. So 0927 goes, "Bro, that is so gross, lol, 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 lol." But one user, 964, goes and says, "It was probably a request to make it cute because the original was too scary, so someone made a collage. Well, it's not all that cute though." So of course the reply, according to the researchers, were interesting because it's shocked the original image is scarier, but at the time he is also saying, wow, the original is even scarier. It's almost as if he's quoting someone from the thread, but is also questioning that claim. However, as Uodasoft points out, reply 927 links the source image and not the HTML page to the post. That means that reply 964 had to have been familiar with the original post to be able to quote someone from the thread. That brings the possibility that reply 964 has seen JTK0 and believed he had seen it and said that. There is also the possibility that 964 had searched for the post on FileMan, seeing as there was a 9-minute window between reply 927 and his reply. Unfortunately, there were no other replies, and there was no unique identifier, such as a trip code, so we are unable to trace this user. Again, we're on the internet with these anonymous chan boards, so it's really just difficult, especially when something is this old to begin with, right? We're going all the way back to 2005, ladies and gentlemen, okay? Almost, well, 20 years ago at this point. So Juventhal, the brilliant mind who was searching for this kind of stuff, who's basically the chief data scraper of this whole operation, had decided that he was going to use what appears to be 3 keywords in this situation specifically. It would be mouth and eyes and mouth, yada yada yada. And as he was searching for these keywords, he had come across one exact reply over here, which was 602.603 in this thread. Unfortunately, Gamushara does not have this image archived, well, rather the Wayback Machine doesn't have hello.jpg archived. But according to Juventhal, when you're actually searching for something over here, what's insane is when you get one of your keywords hit in this situation, remember there are 3, that's pretty common, right? 2 is when you get lucky. 3 is basically an unprecedented state. So at that moment in time, when it comes to things like JTK1, it's usually tricky to distinguish images due to some being very similar in description. However, the one thing that makes JTK1 different from the rest is that the lack of a nose. It makes it likely to be a JTK1 repost because the image was of a woman with only her eyes and mouth visible. Now, ultimately, in this entire process, one of the big things that came out to the researchers was when you're looking at a lot of these older websites, images, and especially videos or any kind of media, they're not usually stored, just everything is stored differently. So when it comes to a lot of media, sometimes it can be stored on different servers. So where, again, these Jeff the Killer images were showing up were on certain occult servers. And when the trail would be lost, sometimes they would show up on different servers. So according to the researchers over here, there was a period of time where data was entirely moved from one point to another, from Gamushira to, I believe, mountain.ecgasai.com. So again, for a lot of the researchers over here with their methodology, which we'll get into a little bit after we look at some more showcases of Jeff the Killer, at that point, the actual methodology and the image analysis really becomes important in the story. But before we get into it, let's just look at a couple more instances of Jeff the Killer, a couple more instances of the search that I didn't really talk about before, and we'll go from there. So now came an image known as the Apartment Screamer. July 9, 2004, a post was made to pia.cc. So this image right over here, it almost looks kind of weirdly AI generated, but it just has that liminality to it, It's just that... Ugh. I don't know, something weird. But again, you can look right over here. There are just 3 people standing right here on this, floor, just staring back at the camera. And if you zoom into it, right, you've got, this lady just staring at you, what appears to be the mother, and of course, this kid. That kid, according to the researchers and the people reading the thread, the people that were able to translate it, was apparently a ghost, okay? They just did not expect this person to be in there. Now, why is that image so necessarily important? Well, because later on 2channel, under a board called News for VIP, where they were discussing the image, that image ended up becoming this screamer right over here. So you see right over here, you've got like what appears to be Jeff the Killer, obviously in this GIF. Yeah, this is the old internet, Now, according to an individual on r/whereisthis, RP Ross, they actually wanted to conduct finding out where this image was, because where was this taken, right? So according to one of the top posters a year ago, they said this should be Ladera Tower in Guam. Here's a recent picture from Guam House Finder. Yeah, and that looks pretty damn close, actually. In fact, even the surroundings look pretty close to that, too. Jesus Christ. Now, on July 9, 2024, an investigator known as Bippy found a JTK1 instance from a website called adults-color.com. So you can see right over here in January 2001-2006, image.adult-color.com has this JPEG with this string attached to it. Now, Juventhal ends up finding 2 edited versions of JTK1 on the same site. This one, for instance, which... what is that one fear that people have of like holes, like trypanophobia or something like that? Tryptophobia? Yeah, this is basically triggering that in me right now. And of course, one with like all these Japanese characters around it as well too. So the important thing about some of these images is when you were able to pull the EXIF data out of these images and kind of get an idea about, like, what were they made with, which according in some cases it could be like Adobe Photoshop 6.0. In some cases they were able to pull up what could be the possible creation dates of these images, which went all the way back obviously to 2006, this right over here. Now, according to, again, digest, they would basically be treated as cryptographic hashes, so duplicate files will receive the same digest when they are archived. So this video by Juventhal, which again he showcases the digest cryptographic hash right over here, which unfortunately is a little bit blocked by the actual player, but you can see that it's a string of characters, which would be the hash file. Anybody to effectively look through a lot of these archives using those digests, because typically, if it's the same image, the cryptographic hash should be the same. So it shows that the JTK1 instance from mods.jp is the same as the pretty face instance, as both of the digests match. So this method of searching was provided by an individual known as Syndixmon after he discovered that instance. It involved grabbing a list of digests from archived JTK1 and JTK2 instances and adding a filter parameter to a time map query, basically just finding every time the specific cryptographic hash or digest shows up. Alright, so to take you guys into the really nerdy part about this entire search and where it's actually gone and how we're able to dig through so much information from so many old servers, is by analyzing the original images to the absolute nth detail. So in this case, I'm going to read you guys and show you the methodology that the actual team has put together to show you how they actually achieve this. So image analysis works similar to this. So when it comes to Jeff the Killer 1, one of the earliest instances was, as we spoke earlier, from FileMan. Now when it came to FileMan, the reality of it is it was only preserved, remember, as a thumbnail. Thumbnails are usually smaller images. Obviously like a YouTube, it's a smaller like image file that's just present on a screen. Similar to how like forum boards would work too. They don't just blast you with the entire image unless you go to the thread and you specifically request for it. So in this case, they have to kind of figure out the methodology for what the original file would kind of look like. So according to the fellows over here, determining the differences between the earliest instance and any other JTK1 instance without having an original full-size version is actually quite difficult. So they wanted to determine the original size and quality of the FileMan instance from just the archived thumbnail, and to finally confirm if the 251 by 215 Gazobox instance was indeed actually the earliest possible image. So to give an idea, one thing they showed was, again, when it came to the actual compression artifacting. So they said that there was a distinct sharpening quality and discoloration that's actually not present in typical JPEG compression, right? JPEG being the traditional standard we use when we upload our thumbnails onto YouTube, for instance, or really any place when we want a compressed thumbnail. So ultimately, going down over here, what was interesting was a piece of software they had found, and again, this isn't a state secret. ImageMagick was a free open source software that a lot of these websites used when it came to on-the-fly manipulation of these digital images. And it's still, from what I understand, used today in certain places. So for instance, Udasoft used an older version of ImageMagick to pinpoint exactly how FileMan at the time would have processed thumbnails and full images. By finding the original uncompressed version of different FileMan images online, he actually figured out that using the default convert ImageMagick command would actually generate an output that exactly matched the archived full-sized images on FileMan byte for byte, okay, pound for pound. This is how we're kind of reverse engineering and figuring out, how the original site would have stored it or what the original image would have looked like. Trying to apply this thumbnail process to any JTK1 instance other than Gazobox does not result in an output similar to FileMan because there are, again, those minute differences. In addition, slight changes to the Gazobox instance, such as cropping and resizing, drastically changes the byte size of the output, showing that actually that 251 by 215 Gazobox instance is actually a mirror of the original full-sized July 2005 FileMan instance. And it's actually indeed the full instance that they actually have currently of Jeff the Killer 1, the actual image that you're seeing here. So again, this is again through their analysis. Now again, looking at the metadata gets even more interesting. Since they now know for sure that the dimensions of the earliest version is 251 by 215, they can use that info with any other metadata within Jeff the Killer 1 and likely determine an origin point, okay? So Jeff the Killer 1's metadata is interesting as it provides the most important insight. Now, when they actually decided to go further into this, this is where it got more intriguing. So Futaba, one of the actual chans where this instance was kind of spotted, showcased right over here with an open source script back in 2005. You could reverse engineer exactly how thumbnailing would happen. If you're looking at this code over here, you can see that they're enforcing a max width and height of 250 by 250. But again, for anybody astute watching this, you can actually see, and the actual researchers bring this up, there was an actual oversight that was here because of a calculation error. If an image was actually above the board's maximum width or height, so 250 in this case, it meant that in some instances they would become 1 pixel more than the maximum. So in Jeff the Killer's case, 250 pixels became 251 pixels. And that one detail was actually enough to confirm the image board that JTK1 came out of. I mean, this is a really intense autism we're seeing right here, you know? So ultimately, at the very least, it used the Futaba PHP script. So different Futaba boards had varying max width and heights, but most notably that Nijura board was actually 250 pixels, which was B on their site. So you can see right over here in the actual image analysis, when they looked at the GIF here, X at resolution, Y resolution of 1, this is what happens because, that is where the bytes in a JPEG image without a strictly defined resolutions would default to, according to the researchers. So through a combination of EXIF data and figuring out exactly how these sites would, modify and compress these images, they were able to, again, deduce that FileMan JTK1 instance was almost certainly a direct upload of a thumbnail from an image board using the Futaba PHP script, most likely the Nijura board on Futaba channel. So again, this is where narrowing down the origin point becomes really important, because the next stage is to obviously dig as many of these instances as you can and be able to pick them apart so you can find, hopefully, the original image, because otherwise, I mean, if none of this stuff works, we're reaching a pretty bleak point where maybe this might just be lost media forever, okay? This is such an insanely deep search to try to find one image that the lengths we're going to is, it might just, it feels like you're watching an episode of like CSI Miami or something, So now, according to the conclusion here with all the information that has been prosed and explained in this document, the official JTK team believes that the original JTK image came from Futaba 2chan, specifically the Nijura board, during a Photoshop festival that took place sometime in mid-July 2005. Source of the original image and the individual behind the image remains unknown as of September 2025. Now, of course, obviously one of the theories, and I started this video off with it, that I kind of fell into was something known as the capping theory. And while, again, according to the researchers here and the people in the community, that is an unlikely theory, again, I just want to keep everything open here. I, on a personal level, even as unlikely as something can seem, unless it's completely 0%, I still always walk into a lot of these things with complete and utter caution. But I'm going to go with the researchers in this case. They've clearly put a lot of their blood, sweat, and tears into this process. And I genuinely do not want to take away from their research. I don't want to drive anybody away from finding Jeff the Killer. I have put a lot of my time and hours into this too. I've put a lot of my hopes and dreams into it. I put money on the line, and the reality of it is that as somebody that kind of started my channel on creepypastas, this holds a very special part to me. So I don't want to ever negate that, and I don't want to turn something to shit, and I don't want to be responsible for any of that kind of crap. So I definitely want to make that pretty much upfront and there. I want to find the origin point of this image. And, even though I can't 100% confirm and get rid of the, conspiracies in my head, I'm going to, again, go with their judgment over mine in this situation, right? I'm going to hope that the image obviously comes from, again, a harmless Photoshop festival, and hopefully we can find that. And again, to circle back to the very beginning of this too, right? One of the most important aspects of this was after months of data scraping, there have been a lot of new informations that have been found. So to tie it all off with, 5 days ago, Juventhal goes in and says, in April 2025, Kako 5CH came back online. So again, we've been talking about this URL quite a fair bit, but for anybody that doesn't know, they were taken down due to a DDoS attack. Actually, I probably did cover this on a video myself too. It was when Japan literally lost one of its largest image boards because, it was attacked by DDoS lovers. But the site's return, projects such as Raving Revolver's crawl of Mimizun.net used its sitemap to enumerate all archived URLs, yielding about 500 gigabytes of raw text stored in an SQLite database. I was inspired, started crawling it from 1999 to 2010, using the scripts and guidance from Raving Revolver. So adapted the tool for 5CH and began crawling in July 2025. And you can see this is when all of this started to occur. So this was a project done for months in the making, if you will. Now, of course, that crawl officially concluded with 2.3 terabytes of raw text, resulting in 7,078 repost URLs from 27.1 million threads. So to put things into perspective, the timeline previously contained about 1,250 JTK1, JTK2 instances. Now this represents a 5 to 6 times increase in known instances, and significantly expands the context available for tracing image circulation paths. And as of right now, obviously the team and Juventhal are most definitely reviewing that whole list. Now the crawl data does reveal the more than new reposts. Because 5CH is a text board where anonymous users post URLs, we can extract, filter, and deduplicate domains. From the crawl, we extracted 576.7 domains. Of those, 260.6K are image file, by extension JPEG, PNG, etc. This gives us a comprehensive list of websites where JTK could possibly appear, okay? So this is fucking huge information to get, okay? Using a version of Detective Raw's Wayback Machine downloader, we'll fetch the domains gathered and build a large-scale reverse image search system focused on a Japanese-centric web. For each image, we will compute perceptual hashes, which are p-hashes, and compare them using Hamming distance to identify exact and near matches. So in a small-scale simulation, thankfully with the power of machine learning and computer scripts and whatnot, we're able to dig through all of this information faster than most humans can. And again, it's this methodology that I really think is going to matter a lot when it comes to finding this image. And I think that's, again, why I wanted to kind of look into the compression and technical metrics of what they're doing, because ultimately it's because of that research is what leads to, again, the reverse image searching that we're talking about right here. So look, huge update in Jeff the Killer, big talk, and I know that a lot of this video was me covering the story from the beginning to the end, but there's just a lot of story to do. And there's a lot of new stuff that comes out in the process of discussing this. This story has taken so many twists and turns to find, but I think, we're not necessarily at the end, okay? And, it's not like what has been discovered is going to lead to the image showing up in the next few days or the next few weeks. But it could be in the next few months. It could be in the next year. It could be before GTA 6 drops. I don't know. But what I do know is that for the community, there is a lot of interest in finding this image. And again, I don't want to take away any steam from this. I want these people to eventually find what they're looking for, because ultimately, this is, in my opinion, one of the biggest pieces of lost media out there. I mean, this image made internet shock stories. This image was a huge part of internet shock culture. It was a huge part of creepypasta culture. Forget the cringy story, okay? Everyone that I know has seen Jeff the Killer, the image. I've seen it. In fact, I would say arguably it was one of the reasons why I probably jumped into the interest of creepypastas, okay? It was an image that was unnerving. It was an image that gave an albeit shitty story some actual relevancy, and that's pretty goddamn powerful. But ultimately, the intrigue surrounding it is unmatched, okay? Where is this image originally from? Are we going to find it? I honestly hope so. And I think that right now, given the most recent updates, there might actually be, it's probably the strongest chance that I've ever seen. So ladies and gentlemen, if you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Dislike it if you dislike it. if you can help with the search, I highly recommend you head over, join their Discord if you can help. Don't just throw them an image. I'm sure they deal with enough of that as it is. But yeah, if you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Dislike, dislike it. I am out.